think we can all remember back not that long ago when
Helpful there.
the United States left Afghanistan. And some of the rapid reaction force out of the Kuwait area made a quick move up into Afghanistan to help get that thing taken care of. The guy that's with us today has got as I looked at his background, a lot of 2135 time, but I find that he's a advanced military studies, or a SAMS graduate, all right? Which means he's a different breed. In a good way. That's in a good way. That's a small group of people that learn how to do strategic planning for our organization. I see that he's been connected to both the Minnesota National Guard and the division headquarters as a strategic planner. Look into our future. A job that most of us do not want to touch. We're not interested in the long term. I need to be able to save to get done and then actually go see it get done right then, not 10 years from now. So I think this guy's got a lot of talent, and he showed us that talent when he took that task force to work. So with that, Jake?
Good afternoon. Okay, so thank you for inviting me here. Some of you may have seen this, I think, at the officer conference, the Mechanized conference in April. This is like the 5th time I've given this presentation. This is a bunch of different audience, though, than the governor's cabinet, who may or may not understand what I said. Or even some of the staffers with the congressional delegation and so. I'm Jake Helgestad. I'm now currently the XO of 1st Armored Brigade. At the time, I just came out of command of 194 Armor. And this is our deployments in the Middle East, which basically covers our time in theater. I got there April of 21, April 30th, and then left theater about the 19th of January of 22. Next slide. So kind of an overarching statement. If anybody who's ever been in command, the first one's pretty self-explanatory. Everybody comes home. But it fed the second one. So we will be ready to fight the Russians. In August of 20, the Russians T-billed 82nd Airborne in Syria. General McKenzie, who was the CENTCOM commander, sent Bradleys immediately up into Syria to stand off against the Russians. Our replacements were 2nd Armored Brigade, 1st Armored Division. Our first SBTC with them for our deployment. Their S3 made the comment that they were not ready to fight the Russians in ground combat. They were, 2-1 was supposed to go to Europe, but because of COVID, they got flipped around. Next thing they stood in the Middle East. They had not shot a tank gunnery in 9 months before they were standing off from the Russians in Syria. So that stood with me that we, as a task force, will be ready to fight if we get called upon. Secondly, if you've ever been in Kuwait, it's either all or nothing. There's kind of no in between. When I get into the Kabul stuff, that kind of accentuates that statement. And then last thing, I coach my son's hockey teams through his youth, and trying to tell kids, like, hey, you gotta trust yourself and your teammates to pass the damn puck. Like, none of you are Wayne Gretzky. But 80% of our task force that deployed, so about 800 out of 1,000, I'm just doing YouTube, have never deployed. So, I remember standing on the chairs in Kabul, in Al-Yasmin, as we're gonna fly into Kabul. It's kind of a little cliche, but as I look at all these kids, we were flying into who knows what at that time, and the statement being you have to trust yourself, you have to trust each other, and everything that we had done through training at that time. Okay, next slide. So our task force itself, what this means is 194 Armor was the foundation of the task force. That's the first 4 columns. It's an armored cab. We were dictated to have mech armor teams, so combining mech infantry and armor together. Then I had Alpha and Bravo 136, 2 additional mech infantry. So I had 5 ground, 3 mech infantry and 2 armor. And then the first red box is my FSC for 194 at the time. Charlie Med, which is the brigade's medical company. And then the last red box was we created a fleet. So overall, in addition, I should say, I had the JN platoon from the BCT, and I had the Stryker Seaburn recon vehicles that were also dictated from CENTCOM. And then we brought a couple of FO Bradleys with us. So all in all, this task force was essentially dictated, and we built it there, the additional capabilities. So if we all had to fight simultaneously at one time, which we did, but in a very different manner. And then when we got into the year, I actually had OpCon of the CENTCOM's chemical company, which initially was an Army Reserve, and then ironically enough became the 434th Chem Company, which I listed as a private a long time ago, and now they're part of my task force. So all in all, this represents about 1,200 Minnesotans that were the response force for CENTCOM. Next slide. So for those of you in Iowa, I haven't grown up in 155 Light Infantry. What does that buy us? I had 29 tanks, 46 Bradleys, 2 Bradley FA Bradleys that have optics that can see out about 20 kilometers, and then my mortar tracks. So all in all, one thing I'm actually most proud of on this slide, in the lower corner, that was our slant on 12 January at the end. So when you have a $4 million per month budget to fix your stuff, you can actually maintain the status of all your platforms. And actually YouTube, raise your hands. So I just found out these guys were in one of the armor companies, and how much did you guys drive your tanks? A lot, yeah. And our tanks are old, they break. So next slide. Okay, so that's my statement about we will be ready to fight, and we will fight, and we will win decisively. On the right-hand column is the entire 1st Armor Brigade's allocation of ammo for FY22. On the left is what we shot in 6 months. So the stuff in bold, I shot almost twice as many Bradley rounds as the 1st Brigade is entirely authorized with 46 Bradleys. The UTM rounds, if you've ever done force-on-force paintball for your M4s, I had no idea how much guys like to shoot each other. But that was all done in urban settings at Camp Beering, so that's 45,000 rounds of force-on-force in urban combat. The 40 Mike rounds, again, the brigade is authorized 752, and we shot almost 9,500. And then tank rounds, you can see, that's 1,698 tank rounds for 29 tanks. I'm just saying I shot extra with my tank crew, so I didn't have a massacre or anything like that. At the end of it, I would say actually during the deployment, we were the most proficient back armor formation in the entire United States Army. And to include everybody was there. What that bought us, the lower right-hand corner, we did a night company live fire with the passage lines and the retrograde passage lines under the live fire. You just simply aren't allowed to do that anywhere in the United States. They just won't let you. And most importantly, I wasn't even there. I had returned from Egypt, and Egypt stayed in my intestinal system. I wasn't even on the range when we did a night company live fire, and it was run by my S3 and my company commanders. Then you can see the number of platoon and crew gunnery. So all of this goes into, next slide, trusting yourself and trusting each other. So every star is someplace I had people. Every star with a circle is where I had people all the time. So at any one time, we had 7 people in 7 locations, from Syria to southern Syria to Jordan, a few locations in Saudi Arabia, and then Kuwait. When I mentioned about the task force being built to fight simultaneously, the last 2 weeks in August, the entire task force, everywhere except the star in Baghdad, I had people in 10 different locations for 2 weeks across the entire Central Command. So going back to trusting yourself and trusting each other, and allowing people to actually succeed. Next slide. Okay, one other thing, Syria, that most people probably don't know, I had a Met Company minus in Syria with 6 Bradleys for the entire duration. So this is just an open source map, so it'll be yelled at by the Intel kids. But just kind of an idea, Minnesota's, I think, about 82,000 square miles. Syria is around 79,000. The green box is ESSA, the Eastern Syria Security Area. It's the area controlled by the Syrian Defense Force, which is the U.S. ally in the Civil War. That represents, that's about 19,000 square miles, and West Virginia is about 21,000. So that green box is about the size of West Virginia. Inside the red box is where my guys and girls operated. So up in the top right-hand corner, that was RLZ, Rural Landing Zone, where all the Bradleys got flown in and out. And then Hasaka, if you Google Hasaka prison break, in January 22, ISIS did a V-bed to break out of an ISIS prison, and there was about a 5-day street fighting right in the middle of our RIPTO without replacements. But my Bradleys, the 6 Bradleys, if you've ever ridden a Bradley or tank, they are not comfortable. Those 6 Bradleys drove 38,000 miles in 9 months. The planet is 26,000 miles. So between soldiers doing their basic 10-level maintenance and the maintenance support teams, and having a relationship with the Air Force. Apparently, if you give Air Force kids AAMs, they'll do anything for you. I might hang out, I'll do as much as you want. But all of our parts had to be flown because the treaty, I'll say the treaty with Iraq, you can't drive our parts with those Bradleys or platforms. They have to be flown by C-17. So you have to understand everything. It's kind of an idea. The Russians were up in the top right-hand corner, and then down where Deir ez-Zor is, that was a Russian-made effort, and it was also the main effort for the U.S. Because Conoco Green Village is just across the river, and that was the corridor where the Russians were going to come. So as in November, we knew the war was going to come in Ukraine. In November 1st, we started planning how to fly our tanks into Syria to use big picture. There's a global war. The U.S. cannot be pinned down in the CENTCOM area. So we were working with AFSET how to fly our tanks and additional Bradleys into Syria for the coming war. Luckily, we did not do it, but since that time, they have exercised the entire architecture of how to get stable rounds from Germany down into the battlefield. And if you follow Twitter or Task Force Spartan, they're flying A-1 tanks pretty routinely in C-17s just as a show of force. Okay, next slide. All right, so Congo. It was a 2-week AT, but instead of Camp Berkeley, we went to Congo. Some of my good guys are joking about. Next slide. Okay, so I took this picture on approach in to Congo. So, we laughed, and I'll get into some details, but it kind of is a funny story. You go to Randal. Our pilot was a certified C-17 pilot to fly a complete blackout, like night vision, no lights on the runway, nothing, dirt runway in the middle of nowhere, which apparently is a big deal in the Air Force. I was like, all right, man, sure, let's not crash. So as we went to run out on the approach, once we crossed the Pakistani border, because I was up in the cockpit, and there was the 2 pilots and myself, and then we had a kid up. And I think we locked and loaded because at that time I don't know if we had to fight off the plane. So I took this picture. This is from like the bubble of the bunk beds in the cockpit of the C-17. And I took this picture and I was like, holy shit, like this is just one of those iconic pictures. Now the funny part is I'm in the back seat behind the pilot and I have to look for contrails for surface air missiles as we come in because that's my job. So we touch down and then the airplane starts going, it's a woman's voice too. I'm like, seriously? She's like, missile launch, missile launch. And I'm like, we just fucking landed here. I'm like, what is going on? And the first lieutenant Air Force co-pilot just reaches up and turns off the button like there's no business. I'm like, what are we doing? Like, I don't know. So either way, that was my introduction to Kabul in the first minute. Next slide. Okay, so this is the PAX terminal at Hamid Kaiser International. Again, it's the I love Kabul. Right above the heart, those 2 guys standing there, that's the Taliban. For everything that happened, the Taliban upheld their end of the bargain, and they were the outer cordon of the entire airport. On the bottom, you can kind of see the light reflection, that's concertina wire. What you can't see is the spacing of 82nd Airborne dudes just sitting on folding chairs about every 15 feet, and it was just a standoff. And for the 82nd guys from the brigade and the battalions that were there, they had all gone in and out of Range Regiment in 82nd. So they all fought the Taliban their entire existence. And here they are just staring at them. It was a little surreal for those guys. Next slide. I'm good never seeing a C-17 again. I don't know, they kept coming and going. Some of them would drop the flares. But they are loud. And it was interesting. There was no real rhyme or reason to their flights in. Again, this is just somebody caught this picture as far as their flares as they were taking off. Okay, next slide. So kind of a timeline of the chaos. So it wasn't as initially chaotic as it may have appeared. In July, Task Force Polar Bears, which was 1st Battalion, 31st Infantry from 10th, 2nd Brigade, 10th Mountain on a Drum, they were leaving Afghanistan in July as the U.S. was leaving. We actually, to be honest, we should have never gone to Afghanistan. And these guys maybe heard me say it, that "you will never wait on us" was the check that I wrote to my commanding general and Arsen. We should have never gone because between Task Force Polar Bears and then July and August, 3rd Brigade, 10th Mountain got approved by SecDef to bring in 2,200 soldiers, and their mission was to be the over-the-horizon force for exactly what happened in Kabul. We were tasked as be prepared to, from on July 15th through 13 August. And I'll get into it. I got woken up on the 12th of August, the day before we got relieved of the mission. The only reason we went is because 3rd Brigade either couldn't, wouldn't, they just couldn't figure out how to get out of Kuwait. They didn't have ammo, they were not operationally ready. So my statements that no one would ever win on us if you give us a mission is the only reason that we got into Kabul, because the active duty couldn't pull their head out of the 5th Port of Contact and get there. And you had an entire brigade commander with about 200 of his soldiers that was at the embassy. But so again, in July, I was able to send 3 people back into Kabul. My planner, actually First Sergeant O'Shea, Chris O'Shea, he was one of my maneuver first sergeants, and then my signal planner. So they were at Kabul at Hamid Kaiser International Airport. Chris actually tells a story about being in a Black Hawk flying over Kabul, and also all the flares start going, and he's thinking the same thing, like I'm getting shot at by a surface there missile. Okay, so then 3rd Brigade, they came in the night of the 12th of August at 11:18 p.m. is when I got woken up. So it was a Thursday. I was actually supposed to fly the next morning to Saudi Arabia. So I thought I overslept because I hear the knocking on my door. Because my sergeant major was supposed to drive me down to AJ airfield to fly down into Saudi Arabia. So I thought I overslept. So I jump out of my bed, open the door to our bathroom, and so I'm standing there in my underwear, like there's nobody at the door. And then I still hear the door rapping, and my outside door is right here. And then my heart sank, because wake-up criteria was the death of a soldier. I'm like, crap. And I open the door next to my ops sergeant major, and I'm trying to process all this, because mind you, this is 10 seconds of dead REM sleep, just staring at somebody. And he's like, sure, we got the CG is called, we have to be in Afghanistan in 24 hours. And it took a few seconds, and I'm like, what? So needless to say, at 23:18 was when we first got notification that we had to go. And at that point, it became organized chaos. We had everything in place. We had already cross-loaded rifles, M4s into any tanker that didn't have an M4. So we were postured to go. And within that time, from 23:18 on the 12th, within 24 hours, I had about 600 people ready to go into Kabul. I was ready to go into the capital before the 82nd Airborne was even officially notified at Fort Bragg. So everything that the world saw on TV, the airport being run over, happened Saturday and Sunday, which would have been 14 and 15 August. But we were ready to go. At that point, there just weren't planes available. Now, 13 August, where it says the CH-47 movement to Jubail, I had about 50 people from the infantry company at a random outpost in the middle of nowhere, Saudi Arabia. So we worked with the aviation brigade to get 2 Chinooks to fly down there, and I left 4 medics and 3 signal. Of the 7 people, 5 of them were ladies, and we left them at an outpost with 211 Bravos and said, hey man, we'll be back smooth active camp period. So APOD, 15 to 17 August is when we went to Helgestad, which was the airport of debarkation. So between the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit, 24th MU, the Special Purpose Marine Air Ground Task Force, which had been created to fight ISIS, and myself, there was about 2,500 Marines and sailors trying to fly out of Helgestad over that time period. Now, relationships mattered for us. When I walked into the PAX terminal, the senior Air Force guy was like, "Hey sir, what's going on?" And I'm like, in my head, like, all right, I've seen you, I know who you are. But he was the senior NCO of the 15 airmen that I had given AAMs to. So because he knew me, he pulled me into a private room with the 2 Marine Corps, the 24th MU and the SP MAGTAF, and we went line by line with how many planes were coming in, what type of planes. The Canadian C-17s, which are called Moose, the Canadian C-130s called Canucks, and then all the American. And so we went through line by line, and when we got to the Marines were good, we're like, all right, so this one's yours. So at this point in time was when we knew I could start flying people out. With that, though, I had talked to the Chief of Staff of U.S. Forces Afghanistan a few times on the airplane. The second time I talked to him, he had mentioned about, I need Jake, he's like, I need you to bring as many infantry as possible. So I had to redo my bump plan entirely. My initial flight in was my TAC, my snipers, my scouts, and my fire section. But then that completely went out the door, and we reshuffled everything, and then to be able to get the task organization on the flights that we knew. So we ended up going in with 425 packs as shown. So I had a TAC of 17 people. My headquarters company turned into a maneuver company with 2 more platoons and scout snipers. Alpha 194 minus, which had 2 tank platoons. So, and I'll speak for these 2. They're young tankers and some of their light infantry heading into Kabul. And then Charlie Team 194, which was 2 back infantry and armor, and then I had Bravo 136, which wet Pierce strike light infantry. So we, we were just waiting for our planes. Let's see, Monday morning, the 16th, when I woke up, I figured the next 48 hours, I did some math this morning, I think I slept for 5 or 6 hours over the next 2 days. So the 17th is when I touched down into Kabul at 2:30 a.m. So we got on our C-17s, my first 250 people, sometime the afternoon of the 16th. We had to fly to Qatar to get gas. And again, I'm in the cockpit. So as I'm in the cockpit, we're taxiing, and the pilots, they're explaining everything to me. I can fly a plane. They have their iPads here, they really just touch buttons. Like, there's no, anything you think about flying a plane, like, all they're doing is reading a book. Like, just a checklist and pushing buttons. It was kind of weird. But then as we're taxiing, a B-52 landed and it drops the parachute. And they told me, like, hey, when the bombers land with the parachute, they have all their bombs. So we park, we're waiting for the gas, we get out. I'm standing from here to the Huey away from the flight line at 6 Eurofighters, so some NATO ally, and 3 groups of 2 take off. And if you've ever been near a twin-engine jet 100 feet away, like 2 of them at the same time, and they're all loaded with bombs underneath and missiles, that was the moment where I'm like, all right, man, like, this is starting to sink in. The pilots then showed me on their iPad the air corridors, and it had been the largest air bridge set up, I'll say maybe since the Marshall Plan. So the altitudes that they had was all the C-17s, everybody refueled at Qatar because you weren't getting gas in Kabul. And so the air corridors, we had to fly around Iran and then through Pakistan. At altitude, we had the bombers, the fuelers, the fighters, and then the cargo planes. And you could see every single one. So the fuelers were used for the fighters to stretch out their legs as long as possible. And then all the cargo planes, you could gas Qatar, touchdown, you got out, and they took off. So that was the moment where I was like, all right, this is kind of real. And one of my guys came up to me and was like, hey sir, like, are you scared? And I used a different adjective. But I'm like, no man, we got this. And that was the point of, and I'll speak for you two, as the commander, like, I knew we were good. I knew everybody could trust themselves, and we had this, and we had the entire U.S. Air Force more JTAX than you could ever imagine. So the next 2 weeks became, for me, was it 17th to 31st, from being in Kosovo, K45 Bravo in 2004, those riots, the riots in Minneapolis, St. Paul, being in Western Iraq and Anbar province, all of it was in a bag. It could shake it up and at any moment pull out, hey, this is what's going to happen this minute. So when we landed, I don't know if the machine gun fire ever stopped. Between the Taliban shooting at themselves, or shooting at whoever, the NSU, which was the CIA's secret army, which I'll get into a little bit more, them shooting at each other. The first 4 or 5 days, every half hour, a jet would soar over the city. And when I say soar over, it was low enough you could see the afterburners, and it was every half hour. So at that point, it was kind of that chaos of, hey, what's going on here? My battle desk, collected, and we had a Ziploc bag of all the rounds that just randomly land on our vehicles that we ended up commandeering. There may have been 100, but just, rounds that just landed, because the entire city is just shooting at itself. Now, going back to my statement there on the task force fighting all simultaneously. So at this point, I'm in Kabul with 3 of the companies. There's a company in Syria. There's a bunch of people in Saudi Arabia. And then Bravo 194 Armor, which was Peer Armor, as a company task force with some maintainers. They were on their way to go to Egypt to do Bright Star, which is the largest U.S.-Egyptian exercise. So I had 14 tanks and a bunch of support elements going to port. So they had to do that mission. Simultaneous to that, my Charlie Med, my XO, Phil Wong, ran everything at Camp Beering. So my Charlie Med, my medical company, medically screened over 5,200 Afghans. So every Afghan that came to Kuwait came to Camp Beering and got screened by my Charlie Med. And then they got put in 2 different camps. And my Ford Logistics company was the mayor cell for one of those camps. So for about a 2-week span, again, I'm in Kabul. My medical people are screening and acting as a doctor's office for every single Afghan that just flew out in Kuwait. I'm sending a company plus this Egypt. I have soldiers in Syria running missions against the Russians, against ISIS. All of that happened simultaneously, which again reinforced for me that you have to trust your people and you have to trust yourself that you'll be able to do it. Because the span of control is the entire Central, there's the Middle East. Okay, last thing, talk about that. Oh, the 30th. So the 30th of August, the drawdown. So that was our last mission. We did a battalion level mission. I'll show it on the next map. But we were the first cog for the retrograde out. When we left, it was just the 3 infantry battalions from the 82nd Airborne and ourselves. And that was it. And then you had Delta Force, you had a bunch of other people that were in retrograde. But we were the first piece to leave, and we did a battalion level operation the evening before we left. All right, next slide. So as we got in the first 2 weeks, our task was to secure Pad 9, which I'll show on the next slide, and then clear it. And that was our sector of the airport. But then most importantly, the third task on order to defend, which is the combat mission. Once the airport security was established, nobody was getting back onto the airport because the world saw the thousands of people on the runways trying to get out. But between the Taliban, ISIS, in Kabul, and then civilians just trying to get out, it was an on order to defend the airport because no one could get back in because the airport was our right out there, and we were surrounded by millions of people. And then the last piece I kind of talked about. Our task was to secure the Faller East, so we were the first piece in the overall retrograde. As an overwhelming show of force, because we put my entire task force, about 400 soldiers, in a very small area, very deliberately, to show everybody that, okay, we're still here. All right, next slide. All right, so this is, I don't even know where this mask came from, but this is what we found. We found color printers. The Army living, the Air Force living, the State Department lives in an atmosphere that I was like, holy crap, this is the greatest job ever. They have all these, and they left everything. So this was like my map that I used. So kind of up in the top right-hand corner, where it says number 10, that was where we lived. We lived in 2 aircraft hangars. But camp, you can't really see it, Camp El-Luzar. That is the State Department compound. That was where all the States lived. They had dorm rooms, basically college dorm rooms. And then next to that, you had in the top right-hand corner, it says ECP number 1. That was a gate that on one side was Taliban, another side was NSU, and then there was an open freeway right into the airport. And I have a picture I'll be able to show a little bit better. But that was, for me, my biggest risk, is there was an entryway into our area that was controlled by the Taliban and the CIA's army who hated the Taliban. And it was a little chaotic. So Area 9, that was our area of the airport that we owned. Through there, about 35,000 people passed through. Again, the NSU, the National Security Unit, I think it was called, they had by province, but part of the treaty with the Taliban is their fighters could come through, and then their families could come through. So over the course of about 2 weeks, or actually about 10 days, 35,000 people came through our area with their CIA handlers. So where it says North HI Communications, that was the headquarters, the 2nd Airborne, the Marines. That was where all the processing came through. The North Gate, which is just a little bit above that, the Marines owned that. There were refugees that came through that gate. There's a little black tick mark between 11 and 10 there. That is, it's just called the Black Gate. That was a gate between us and the Taliban, where if people would jump over, you gave them the option to jump back over the T-wall, or they opened the Black Gate and gave them to the Taliban. Because unfortunately, it was not our responsibility to collect people up and give them a free ride back out of here. And so it was a amnesty gate between us and the Taliban as people were trying to get onto the airport. And then you can kind of see the bottom right-hand corner, that was the Far East. We extended a little bit farther. That was the area that we controlled the last night we were there. The East Gate, actually that gate, which is circled there, that was where the ISIS V-bed bomber went off. My PA, my physician assistant, she actually, my surgeon, my PA, and 2 of my medics assisted in the mass cow. And she was at Abbey Gate about 5 minutes after the bomb went off, assisting, saving lives again, doing everything she could. Then the British, the SAS owned Camp Sullivan. And then the South Gate there, that was the amnesty gate between the Taliban and the 82nd Airborne. So every single nation that was flying, was sending planes in to get their civilians out or their embassy people out, came through that gate. And it all had to be coordinated between the Taliban and the 82nd. The one day I was there, 6 Russian transport planes landed, and carloads of dudes in civilian clothes and civilian cars drove out the back and just disappeared in the city. So if you've ever seen Star Wars, where they're at that like bar with all the different aliens, like that's what that place looked like. Because you had every single nation coming and going, and you're like, all right, hey, the Russians just landed and disappeared in the city. Like, what do you think they're doing? It was a little chaotic. And then the top right-hand corner, myself and Steve, that was the spot. Or it's the blue, that's the CIA compound. If you went there at night, their EOF, they'd simply just shoot at you. So no one really knows who was there, but you avoided it like the flag. Because there was no escalation of force, there were shots fired. So within the entire airport, it's one runway. There's T-walls, so 20-foot jersey or concrete walls. And then inside of that, there was one road that would bring the entire perimeter of the airport. Let's see, next slide. Okay, so these next 2 slides are our sector sketch and our sector sketch and our naming convention. So what this is our area. There are 68 buildings. So if you look at it, the taxes I gave to my 2 master gunners, like, hey, we need to prioritize, we need to number the buildings, prioritize and identify where the QR finger points are, where the casualty collection points are, based on our retrograde, if we had to fight out of there. And this is what I got So if you start in the top right-hand corner, you'll see the boundary between us and the battalion on our left perimeter. If you go across, you'll see the company ones. There's 5 towers. So the top left is Tower 9-1, all the way across to 9-5. And then the building number starts with number 1, because that's where the gate was. So we just started at that top right-hand corner, and it went 1 to 68. The casualty collection points kind of went reverse. The first CCP is in the bottom left there, and there's 7 identified across the entire area that we were in. And then QRF link-up points. So we identified 1 spot per company area of operation for the QRF, which was Antio company would link up if needed. So again, this was our area. And about 35,000 people came through here. Next slide. So this is our second sketch. And so for anybody who, say the tank and armor guys from 1st Armor Brigade, we treated each of the towers as a battle position. So we also, you can kind of see them, there's the blocking, there's the T for the blocks on the bottom. They're green on here. So we had 4 blocks set up, and against that, then the towers were the battle positions, and from there, massive gunners treated each tower as a BP, and then the target reference points. So kind of see it, like 9-, let's see, on the far right, there's not, by right or left, 9-1-9, so that would be TRP 919. So everything was identified as far as target reference points against the towers, and you can see the smaller range were M4 range, and then 240s is the farther range. Now, all of this was done via analog with a bunch of E4s and some markers that somewhere they found. And when we brought in our consolidated giant, it was maybe half as big as this table, to the 1st Brigade 82nd, like, hey, here's our sector sketch. He's like, well, their ops range was a little surprised. And I'm like, well, this is what you're supposed to do, right? Like, you're supposed to do this thing. And so needless to say that everybody started making one. At that point, though, was when I realized the difference between us and the 82nd, because the sewer system was backing up. And it's the 82nd, right? Like, they're good at jumping out of airplanes, they're walking and running. But nobody knew how to fix a sewer, so they had no idea about plumbing. So I'm like, hey, I got a guy who owns a plumbing company in Minnesota. So that guy from 136 fixed the plumbing for the 82nd. I don't know how many, I didn't realize so many kids knew how to hotwire cars. YouTube. Like, suddenly we have fleet cars because everybody's hotwiring cars. Where we actually became, I'll say like an Avis help desk. The Marines showed up asking if we had buses. Well, like, no, they guys go hotwire some buses so they can transport the refugees. At that point, we got the 82nd guys who were like, hey, you guys have all these extra life skills. We shoot people in the face with this and that. We'll shoot you in the face too, but we're going to fix your plumbing, we're going to hotwire a car, and we have life skills. So there was that kind of difference between us and the active duty guys. All right, next slide. So this kind of gives you a picture. This was our entry into our area. So you can see the outer Oregon wall. That was the wall that separated us. That's Cabo on the left. And then the road that goes through, that just roamed the entire airport. And then there's a secondary wall that was kind of that buffer. But this is what we inherited. I'm like, all right, this is not working out. Because again, Toyota's got an entire division on technical trucks, the Helix Toyota tech trucks. And they were rolling through here with Dishkas and Mark-9, all this, more ammunition and more guns than you've ever seen. And my biggest fear was an ISIS person hiding away, going through, and just what happened in that gate. So you can start to see, there's my engineer E6, and then I had an engineer captain. I'm like, I gave my guidance, I'm like, you come back there, and just let me know how many people you need. And so we started doing our blocks, setting up our serpentine. I think my CSM actually drove the forklift because he's licensed to drive a forklift as we started moving 20,000-pound T-walls around. Next slide. So actually, sorry, go back one. So with that little, on the left, front left there, or middle left, next slide. That's what it looked like at night. So we triple stranded everything, we moved as many walls around to make a serpentine to go through, like an actual checkpoint, so to be, as opposed to just letting dudes drive through. Next. Okay, my snipers, my senior sniper, I'm like, hey man, this is what I need you to do. What is the deadliest avenue of approach? They identified Tower 91, and they lived in there 24 hours a day for 12 straight days with their 50 cals. And the reason it was that specific road is that they were looking down the road straight west. That led, they had Overwatch on the Talon and the NSU, who kept shooting at each other. And then from that gate, that road would come down. So they had the ability to see every single Afghan vehicle that would come into our area with their 50 cals. But a bunch of snipers living in a tower for 12 straight days. Next slide. We had no cars. We had nothing. We got off the plane. So if you ever run into an airport, normally there's bags on there that guys with good night vision going on their shift. Is that you guys? Shit. All right, next slide. So kind of to show the contrast, in the front ground, those are RPGs. Like, when the NSU would come in, they literally just drop the trucks, get on a plane, and fly out. We had to call it EOD because there was well over 100 pounds of C4 with blasting caps already in. They just left the stuff sitting there. And so here you have RPGs in the background. You kind of make it up as a princess blanket. Like, there's a bigger contrast to the 2 weeks. It's a tech truck with a pile of RPGs, and some girl lost her princess blanket. All right, next slide. I think this is where you guys live, maybe. So we just had hangers. Middle of the night, we're like, hey, live here. We stretched out. First shower I took was maybe 4 days later with like a chemical shower. Like if you had a chemical spill, you pull the red thing. It was cold as hell. But this is, you just kind of made do. I don't even know where they got the foam pads. Next slide. And I have this one in here because where do you find a happy birthday hat? So this kid's, you guys know who this is?
Yeah, this is more
Yeah, he's on RTO doing wearing a happy birthday hat in the middle of the town. I don't know where the hell he got the hat. Okay, next. So that was everything in Cabo. Again, in Camp Peering, my medical company screened everybody. These are 3 of my medics. 4 of the medics. We had basically a daycare. They were playing around Rosie, I think. Next. And then this is a picture from my forward logistics company as a mayor sales. So we were in support of the State Department because the ambassador came a few times. All of this is just donated stuff. When I say stuff, it came from the planet, somewhere on the planet. And so each tent had a representative. They were one of the tents in a 3-star general from the Afghan army, and they would work like, hey, what do you need for clothes, hygiene, personal hygiene, and it was a refugee camp, displaced persons camp that we had to run. Next slide. So this is my leadership that I took with me. On your far right, that's Sergeant Evans in E5. Seriously, that kid can hotwire a car in 15 seconds. But he was my S1 on the ground. He actually, the giant street sweepers that you see at airports, he hotwired the thing, and an E5 admin guy from Minnesota National Guard cleared all the FOD at the runways to keep the evacuation going. So whatever you hear, it was that dude and somebody else. When they would come over to us and say, you guys got to clean everything else so the jets can land again. Because if you remember, can you go back to that Princess blanket one? Right there. All that trash, that's just a little area. So whenever it got too much, they would call us, and Sergeant Evans would get this giant street sweeper and clear the runways and the holding areas so the planes could land. Otherwise, that was my staff. Rachel, she's the PA. She was the one at Abbey Gate shortly thereafter the suicide bomber. Next slide. And, okay, so is anybody in the Air Force? Okay. I mean, we love the Air Force, but holy crap. Like, they're the worst airline in the world. So when we were supposed to leave the morning of the 30th, the 31st, like, it was sequenced out. Instead, the Air Force just threw C-17s, and they're like, hey, get on this plane. Like, you guys gotta leave now. Like, oh, well, we're on the other side, it's gonna take some time. So I was the last flight out. This year, my intel officer, who I made as my executive officer, he was on the plane. The plane was supposed to go to Qatar. When you got to Qatar, the Air Force dumped you off, and you were stuck there until you could figure out how to get to Kuwait. And one of my groups, you guys get stuck there?
Yes.
How long? Yeah, so this picture, Captain Charles Anderson, he goes up to the cockpit, so you have a military intelligence captain, goes to the cockpit of the C-17 and says, hey man, we live in Kuwait, can you fly us to Kuwait instead of Qatar? Yeah, that's cool. Next thing you know, in front of this is a mid-air KC-135, and they have two F-15 Strike Eagles on the wings escorting them. And so, again, you have a captain asking a captain, changing the country they're landing in with fighter jets escorting them. And I'm like, and he told me the story. I was like, you did what, man? So, yeah, next slide. Yeah, it worked because they were stuck in it. All right, so I know General Donahue got all the glory of that picture of the last ramp. Officially, I had the first ramp picture. This was the last. They dropped, they closed the ramp, I pulled up my Wooby, and I woke up 3 hours later and we touched down in Kuwait. Okay, next slide. Now, I added this picture, so I think enough time's passed. We were the U.S. Army unit selected, and I got to meet the president and his wife on Thanksgiving night. So it was pretty cool. I will say that with the I wasn't supposed to talk. And then when the White House dude was like, all right, hey, senior commanders, you're going to talk, I was like, I got like 2 minutes to figure out what I'm going to say to the President of the United States and his wife, and I'm like writing down notes saying, holy crap. So I, talk, blah, blah, blah. And then the President started talking, and he was telling a story. He was a senator about being in Alaska, and some guy called him a son of a bitch. At that time, Mrs. Biden, Dr. Biden, turns and like punches him in the shoulder and says, Joe, you can't talk like that. And I tell that story, I laugh, because no matter who you are, everybody's still going to punch you if you talk about the President of the United States. It was a good time. And you can see across the bottom, the Marines were in off the coast of Ethiopia. The Space Force was wherever they are. The Air Force unit, I think, was somewhere in the South Pacific. So it was a good time. Next slide. And this is my last one. T-walls in the Army. So this is ours. I can guarantee you it's the first contemporary art painted T-wall. So as they were doing it, it is in solid colors. And my driver, specialist So, he basically wrote the middle part there, he drew all that, he doodled it. And I'm like, dude, that's not doodling. The coins that you guys have, he designed that on his phone. Accidentally deleted it like 3 or 4 times and saved up enough money to buy an iPad. So between him and Lieutenant Lewis, who was my chemical officer, they did all of this. And so yeah, that's our T-wall that will hopefully stay at Camp Green for some time. Next slide. Okay, sorry. With that, yeah, that's 15 minutes over 2 months, or I'm sorry, over 9 months in theater. There's a lot of other crazy stuff that happened. But yeah, with the Cabo stuff, again, we should have never been there. But we were ready to go. My ammo guy, Sergeant First Class Smith, actually traded a Monster for 16 Javelin missiles, because they were the only Javelin missiles that were in Kuwait. But we had a relationship with people. So yeah, it was interesting. Now it's just an interesting story. At the time of Kabul, again, it was the riots in Kosovo, it was being in Iraq, it was being, I think, Minneapolis, St. Paul riots, all at one time, and it varied simultaneously. Luckily, it was never war Iraq, but it was interesting. And you two, I'm sure, was just a story. I don't know what you did to it. Okay, I mean, with that, I don't know if anybody's got any questions. Otherwise, to it.
Hey, this is really off the wall. My wife earlier today says, why would they use that word bastard?
Oh, yeah, so.
So I know that, I know.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell everybody?
actually, when I say they, our enterprise tried having us change our name to the point that they did BTC to my CSM and said, we're going to make you change your name legally. I'm like, I had a backup name. We were going to be called the Task Force after Ohio State, just to spite everybody. 194 Armor was the first armor unit sent to the Pacific in World War II. So at Brainerd, they left, they fought in Bataan, they were in Bataan Death March, prison ships, and they were POWs. And so James Hewitt was a war correspondent, wrote about the battling bastards of Bataan, and I'll say very loosely that everybody hated MacArthur, and they blamed him for it. That was the battling bastards of Bataan. And so the lineage comes from the battling bastards of Bataan. And so, yeah, I'll leave it at that. It gets a little contemporary. Yeah, Jamamas, Bahamas, yep. Correct. And so the motto is remember Bataan, never forget. Remember Bataan, never forget is the Batan's motto. So yes, today's world, you see bastard, everybody raises an eyebrow, you can explain it to them, but like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. It isn't something derogatory. Unless you, yeah. Sorry. Anything else? All right, thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Randal Dietrich. I'm Executive Director of the Minnesota Military and Veterans Museum, right over there. I wanted to give you a quick 10-15-minute update about what we're up to and the stories we seek to tell, which are your stories. I have a number of slides, brief presentation, so we'll turn through the slides pretty quickly, but I want to take 10 minutes and give you a quick update about what we're going to do. Next slide, please. We did hold a mission briefing for many folks across the state of Minnesota on some leading veteran groups. 3 of our board members, including General Nash, all did convene at division headquarters in Northern Hills a couple weeks ago. Next slide, please. And we did our briefing. Next slide. And part of that briefing also included a traveling exhibit that we've created on post 9/11 veterans, covering the long deployment and Eric Kurspa and others. And this traveling exhibit is one, next slide, that we posted in St. Paul at division headquarters and then also at the Sea District Armory up in Duluth earlier this year. We were down in Mankato actually at the Student Union, which was a trip to meet veteran students at Mankato State about the post 9/11 experiences of you all. Knowing that many of them who are coming through weren't born on 9/11, but it was a great opportunity for us to start to educate the 60 million Americans who weren't even born on 9/11 and making sure they understand the roots of what we've been fighting for and about for the last 20 years. So that exhibit, which includes a piece from the World Trade Center fragment, as well as many other stories of the uniform of 4-star General Joe Botel and Patricia Baker's flight uniform and Andrew Baker's Distinguished Service Cross and other items are a part of that traveling exhibit that we opened. And then part of that presentation, with the next slide please, is Elliot Ackerman is a Marine veteran who's written a book that I encourage you to pick up if you're interested about how things did unfold in Kabul a year ago, called The Fifth Act. He's a well-respected journalist and 5-time deployed Marine veteran, and he was our guest in Arden Hills and spoke with our attendees, including the Lieutenant Colonel Helgestad, who was also there. Next slide. And next slide. And part of what we've been doing with documenting the experiences of post 9/11 veterans and the Red Bull for sure is trying to do relevant work at the museum. And this is an example of that because the story you just heard, we sat down with Lieutenant Colonel and Captain Cochran, who we heard him mention, and the ambassador, Ross Wilson, who's also a Minnesotan, and recorded all those stories on camera. And now that story is part of a 12-minute video you can find on our YouTube page. So what you all heard about a few minutes ago, looking at it historically, is historic, if you understand the history of our military service. And we want to make sure we're documenting that time. So if you go to our website and to the YouTube page that we have, you can actually find a 12-minute video about many of the things that Lieutenant Colonel will touch on, including comments from, again, Captain Cochran and our U.S. Ambassador Ross Wilson, who's a Minnesotan from Edina, trying to be relevant to the work that we do. And then the other part of our briefing that day, next slide please. You can't read all of those words up there, but we did a quick breakdown of what is up there. And the other part of our briefing that we did offer was news on our new facility that we're currently planning. We've acquired 32 acres of property just outside the walls of Camp Berkeley, right along the highway of 371 and 115. So we take that exit, there's 32 acres, and those belong to the museum, and now by extension Camp Berkeley has now been extended to 53,032 acres as a result of the property that's been acquired to build this new facility on. Next slide, please. Gives you kind of a reference to where that is next to the tank and across from the cemetery right up there by the highway. The next slide. An overhead view of what's being planned on this 32 acres. What you see depicted on the screen is about 10 acres of space on that 32-acre plot of land that we're going to be working on. It's part of a $33 million capital campaign. To date, we've raised $18 million of that $33 million. We have a pending $10 million request to the state legislature, so hoping that after the election happens, that will fall into place, leaving the remaining $5 million to be raised by private donors. But already, private donors have stepped up and donated the first $5 million. So we're halfway there. We have a private fundraising goal, $5 million to go, $10 million request pending at the state legislature brings us to that $33 million marker. Next slide, which will then help to fund in its entirety a new 40,000 square foot facility. I encourage all of you in your free time here in a few minutes to come over and see us at our current space. Understand that our current space is about 6,000 square feet of museum that you can walk through. There's another 10 buildings that you really can't walk through very well because it's packed with artifacts and archives. And Dan Dior, our archivist, who many of you know, is here and in back filming. We're happy to talk to all of you about items that you might want to donate to our museum. But the transition, the game-changing effect is we moved from about a 6,000 square foot museum or building that was never meant to be an actual building to a dedicated 40,000 square foot facility to tell your stories and to tell them in a very serious and real kind of way, understanding that the state of Minnesota has never had the chance to do this before, to build a museum dedicated to Minnesota veteran stories, and that's what we're doing with your help. To break ground next summer, summer of 2023, and to open the doors to a new facility in the summer of 2025. So not so far away anymore, some private fundraising to follow. Next slide, please. And what you get is something that can't be missed in many ways, and something that will certainly be a landmark for all those folks traveling between the Twin Cities and the Brainerd Lakes area. You can't miss this site and the parade ground outside and the big American flag and 6 service flags dedicated to your all stories. And we want to do this in partnership with many other organizations and make sure we represent all service branches. But for obvious points that were made a few minutes ago, it really does start with the Red Bull, the 34th, and telling that story. And going back to the boys in Brainerd and Baton are all the stories we're working on telling. A few final slides to share with you. A couple of different renderings. Next slide, please. Again, it is adjacent to the Veterans Cemetery. One of our board members is MDVA Commissioner Larry Herkey, Veterans Affairs Commissioner for the state of Minnesota. One of his responsibilities among overseeing the support of the 300,000 Minnesota veterans currently is the state cemetery system for veterans. So Commissioner Herkey, being a board member and also in charge of these cemeteries across the state of Minnesota, is going to make sure we have a strong connection going between that veteran cemetery and this new space for family members that make use of both spaces. And the last couple slides, and the final point to make, next slide, is our board has been clear on the idea that yes, it does start in many ways with the 34th of the Red Bull, but we also want to make sure that we're representing all service branches, including the Air Force, that you heard mentioned earlier, and including the Navy. In this case, the board took an action about a year ago. This is a picture, a photograph of the USS Minneapolis St. Paul submarine, the Los Angeles class submarine that was launched in 1984, decommissioned in 2008. Was sitting at the Bremerton Naval Yard since 2008, and the Navy gives states and locales a chance to claim parts of these pieces before they're recycled forever. So working with the governor's office, we sent a letter to the Navy asking that the sail and rudder of that submarine be saved. Next slide. And after sitting outside in Bremerton since 2008, back on August 29th, 6 weeks ago, we went out and secured those pieces through Anderson Trucking, next slide, and brought them back here to Camp Ripley. So 4 lowboy semi-tractor trailers traveled out to Washington State via Anderson Trucking, who donated their time and talent to make that happen. It was brought here to Camp Ripley. Next slide. And next slide. And next slide. And then thankfully, because Dan and I can't lift these pieces by ourselves, we have a very talented crew. The next slide. From Camp Ripley help us offload those pieces, which weigh 35,000, 25,000, 12,000 pounds respectively. And those are just outside here. When you go have the break here in just 1 minute when I wrap up, come over and see the museum and you'll see the actual submarine pieces outside too. And final slide is what you see now, what you saw on the slides obviously is a submarine part that will be interesting to see when it's refurbished, reconditioned, and installed properly at our new site. Certainly will be a visual attraction for people that drive by and see a submarine emerging from the Minnesota prairie land. But there will be a significant restoration period. We've identified a naval veteran who's experienced in this kind of work who will lead the effort to restore this piece, and the restoration of the piece that you see out here to what it will look like when we're done is significant, but that's the work of our museum, is to preserve those pieces of history, whether it dates back to a Cold War era Los Angeles class submarine, or documenting the experiences of Lieutenant Colonel Helgestad and Captain Cochran and others, is to do relevant work and to try to do it well. So as we do this restoration work and prepare to transport it and install it in a new building open in 2005, understand the sail and the rudder is big and impressive. But what's more impressive and more important, of course, are the veterans who served aboard that submarine and their stories of service, which is what we're really dialed into. So as we're doing the restoration work on this sub, much like we're doing the oral history interviews with folks who were in Cabo last year, is to fill this new museum with stories of veterans so that future generations have a place to come and remember and respect the kind of service that you've demonstrated over the years. Thanks very much.